Hello, how are you? Hope you're well. And this is Nana's excited face. I've decided to leave the Hunger Book Games for me to read on my own because it's a hard one to read. It's not getting going. Each chapter, I think, oh, they're going to start the Hunger Games, and it doesn't. So, yeah, I ordered a book. It arrived an hour ago. I read it in my 20s and it stayed with me for a long time. Very thought, it just makes you think. And it's called The Solitaire Mystery. Okay, I'll just read one of the praise for the book. It says, a whimsical, thought-provoking story with more than one surprise in store. So, right, okay. You can tell I'm excited, can't you? Right, so this is The Solitaire Mystery. We'll see how it goes, but I think you'll enjoy it. I know I'll enjoy reading it again. As I say, it's in my 20s, so it's a long time ago. Okay. In this story, you will meet Hans Thomas, who reads the Sticky Bun book on his way to the philosopher's homeland. Dad, who grew up in Arundel as the illegitimate child of a German soldier before running away to become a soldier. Mama, who has lost herself in the fashion world. Line, or is that Line? Line sounds better, so we call her Line, who is Hans Thomas's grandma. Grandpa, who was sent to the Eastern Front in 1944. The dwarf, who gives Hans Thomas a magnifying glass. A fat lady in the pub in Dorf. The old baker, who gives Hans Thomas a fizzy drink and 4 sticky buns in a paper bag. A fortune teller and her extremely beautiful daughter, an American lady who splits herself in 2. A Greek fashion agent, a Russian brain researcher, Socrates, King Oedipus, Plato, and a talkative waiter. Even I don't understand all that, but I know that everything will become clear. Okay, you ready for this bit? In the Sticky Bun book, you will also meet Ludwig, who came over the mountains to Dorf in 1946, Albert, who grew up as an orphan after his mother died, Baker Hans, who was shipwrecked in 1842 on his way from Rotterdam to New York before he settled down as a baker in Dorf. So I'm guessing Dorf is, where they all live, possibly. Frode, who was shipwrecked with a large cargo of silver in 1790 en route from Mexico to Spain. Stein, who was engaged to Frode and was pregnant when he left for Mexico. The farmer Fritz Andre and the storekeeper Heinrich Elbricht. 52 playing cards. Now that's the key to the story. Playing cards. Including the Ace of Hearts, the Jack of Diamonds and the King of Hearts. And the Joker, who sees too deeply and too much. 6 years have passed since I stood in front of the ruins of the ancient temple of Poseidon at Cape Sunion and looked out across the Aegean Sea. Almost 1.5 centuries have passed since Baker Hans arrived on the strange island in the Atlantic Ocean, and exactly 200 years have passed since Frode was shipwrecked on his way from Mexico to Spain. I have to go that far back in time to understand why Mama ran away to Athens. I would really like to think about something else, but I know I have to try to write everything down while there is still something of a child in me. I am sitting by the living room window at he soy, watching the leaves drift from the trees outside. The leaves sail down through the air and come to rest like a loose carpet on the street. A little girl wades through the horse chestnuts, which bounce and scatter between the garden fences. It's as though nothing fits together anymore. When I think about Frode's playing cards, it's as though all nature has come apart at the seams. Right, okay. I understand that might have been a bit... But I know this story is... Well, I'm not saying anymore. The first chapter is spades. Not sure how much you know about playing cards. I grew up with them. There's 4 suits, which is spades, hearts, clubs and diamonds. Okay, clubs and spades are black, hearts and diamonds are red. And there are 10 numbered, 1 is ace, and 11, 12 and 13 are jack, queen and king. Okay, you might know all that, but I put that in just in case, because we don't play with playing cards much these days. So this first chapter is Ace of Spades, so it's the 1 of spades, and there's a picture of it there. Ace of Spades, a German soldier came cycling along the country road. The great journey to the homeland of the philosophers began in Arendal, an old shipping town on the south coast of Norway. We took the ferry, the Bolero, from Kristiansand to Hirtshals. I'm not going to say much about the trip down through Denmark and Germany, because apart from Legoland and the large dock area in Hamburg, we saw little more than highways and farms. It was only when we got to the Alps that things really began to happen. Dad and I had a deal. I wasn't supposed to complain if we had to drive a long time before stopping for the night, and he wasn't allowed to smoke in the car. In return, we agreed to make lots of cigarette stops. These cigarette stops are what I remember most clearly from the time before we reached Switzerland. The cigarette stops always began with Dad giving a little lecture about something he'd been thinking about while he'd been driving, and I'd been reading comics or playing solitaire in the back seat. More often than not, solitaire is a game that you can play with cards on your own. And sorry, it's just a message from Lucy in answer to my I'm going on to another book. Yeah, and there's a few games of solitaire, and I can show you a couple of games of solitaire if you want me to. Right. More often than not, his lecture had something to do with Mama. Otherwise, he would go on about stuff which had fascinated him for as long as I'd known him. Ever since Dad had returned from his life at sea, he had been interested in robots. Maybe that in itself wasn't so strange, but with Dad, it didn't end there. He was convinced that one day science would be able to create artificial people. By this, he didn't just mean those dumb metal robots with red and green flashing lights and hollow voices. Oh no. Dad believed that science would one day be able to create real, thinking human beings like us. And there was more. He also believed that fundamentally human beings are artificial objects. We are dolls bursting with life, he would say. This sort of declaration often came after a little drink or two. When we were in Legoland, he stood and stared at all the Lego people. I asked him if he was thinking about Mama, but he just shook his head. Just imagine if all this suddenly came alive, Hans Thomas, he said. Imagine if these figures suddenly began to toddle around among the plastic houses. What would we do then? You're crazy, was all I could say. I was sure that this kind of statement wasn't normal for fathers who took their children to Legoland. I was about to ask for an ice cream. You see, I had learned that it was best to wait until Dad started to air his odd ideas before asking for something. I think he occasionally felt guilty for going on about things like this with his son, and when you feel guilty, you tend to be a little more generous. Just as I was about to ask for the ice cream, he said, "Basically, we ourselves are such live Lego figures." I knew the ice cream was a sure thing now, because Dad was about to philosophise. Just to let you know, philosophy is what this book is all about. I don't understand the whole thing about philosophy, but philosophy makes you think about everything around you in a different way. But I think it'll come clear. We were going all the way to Athens, but we weren't on a normal holiday. In Athens, or at least somewhere in Greece, we were going to try and find Mama. It wasn't certain that we'd find her, and even if we did find her, it wasn't certain that she'd want to come home with us to Norway. But Dad said we had to try, because neither he nor I could bear the thought of living the rest of our lives without her. Mama ran away from Dad and me when I was 4 years old. That's probably why I still call her Mama. Gradually, Dad and I got to know each other a bit better, and one day it just didn't seem right to call him Daddy anymore. Mama went out in the world to find herself. Both Dad and I realised that it was about time you found yourself if you'd managed to become the mother of a 4-year-old boy, so we supported the actual project. I just could never understand why she had to go away to find herself. Why couldn't she sort things out at home in Arundel, or at least be satisfied with a trip to Christiansand? My advice to all those who are going to find themselves is stay exactly where you are. Otherwise, you're in great danger of losing yourself forever. So many years had passed since Mama left us that I couldn't really remember what she looked like. I just remembered that she was more beautiful than any other woman. At least that's what Dad used to say. He also believed that the more beautiful a woman is, the more difficulty she has in finding herself. I had been searching for Mama from the moment she disappeared. Every time I walked across the market square in Arundel, I thought I might suddenly see her. And every time I was in Oslo visiting Grandma, I looked for her along Karl Johan Street, but I never saw her. I didn't see her until Dad came in one day holding up a Greek fashion magazine. There was Mama, both on the cover and inside the magazine. It was pretty obvious from the pictures that she still hadn't found herself, because these were not pictures of my Mama. She was clearly trying to look like somebody else. Both Dad and I felt extremely sorry for her. The fashion magazine had found its way to us after Dad's aunt had been to Crete. There, the magazine with pictures of Mama had been hung up on all the newspaper stands. All you had to do was toss a few drachmas on the counter. Drachmas are coins that used to be the money in Norway, I think. And the magazine was yours. I thought it was almost comical. We had been looking for Mama for years, while all the time she'd been down there posing and smiling to all the passers-by. "What the hell has she gone and got herself mixed up in?" Dad asked, scratching his head. Nevertheless, he cut out the pictures of her, stuck them up in his bedroom. He thought it was better to have pictures of someone who looked like Mama than to have none at all. That was when Dad decided we had to go to Greece and find her. "We must try to tow her home again, Hans Thomas," he said. "Otherwise I'm afraid she may drown in this fashion fairy tale." I didn't really understand what he meant by that. I had heard of people drowning in big dresses lots of times, but I didn't know it's possible to drown in a fairy tale. Now I know it is something everyone should be careful about. When we stopped on the highway outside Hamburg, Dad started to talk about his father. I had heard it all before, but it was different now with all the cars whizzing by. You see, Dad is the illegitimate child of a German soldier. I'm no longer embarrassed to say it because I know now that these children can be just as good as other children. But that's easy for me to say. I haven't felt the pain of growing up in a little southern Norwegian town without a father. It was probably because we had arrived in Germany that Dad started to talk again about what had happened to Grandma and Grandpa. Everyone knows that it wasn't easy to get food during the Second World War. Grandma Line, I'm going to have to call her Line. I think I'm going to forget to call her Lena. Okay. Grandma Line knew this too. It doesn't sound as good though, does it? I'm going to make an effort. And if I keep on getting it wrong, then I'll go to Line. Grandma Lena knew this too, the day she biked up to Froland to pick cowberries. She was no more than 17 years old. Problem was, she got a flat tyre. That cowberry trip is the most important thing that has happened in my life. It might sound strange that the most important thing in my life happened more than 30 years before I was born. But if Grandma hadn't had a flat tyre that Sunday, Dad would never have been born. And if he hadn't been born, then I wouldn't have stood a chance either. What happened is as follows. Grandma got a flat tyre when she was up at Froland with a basket full of cowberries. Of course, she didn't have a repair kit with her, but even if she'd had 1,001 repair kits, she probably couldn't have fixed the bike herself. That was when a German soldier came cycling along the country road. Although he was German, he was not particularly militant. On the contrary, he was very polite to the young girl who could not get home with her cowberries. Furthermore, he had a repair kit with him. Now, if Grandpa had been one of those malicious brutes who readily believed all German soldiers occupying Norway at that time were, he could have just kept on going. But of course, that's not the point. No matter what, Grandma should have stuck her nose in the air and refused to accept any help from the German military. The problem was that the German soldier gradually took a liking to the young girl who had run into bad luck. Her greatest misfortune, though, was actually his fault, but that happened a few years later. At this point in the story, Dad used to light a cigarette. The thing was, Grandma liked the German too. That was her great mistake. She didn't just thank Grandpa for repairing her bike for her, she agreed to walk down to Arundel with him. She was both naughty and stupid, no doubt about it. Worst of all, she agreed to meet. Okay, I'll try and read his name. She agreed to meet Unterfeld Verbel Ludwig Messner again. That's how Grandma became the sweetheart of a German soldier. Unfortunately, you don't always choose who you fall in love with. However, she should have chosen not to meet him again before she'd fallen in love with him. Of course, she didn't do this and consequently paid for it. Grandpa and Grandma continued to meet each other secretly. If the people of Arundel had found out she was dating a German, it would have been the same as banishing herself to exile, because the only ordinary Norwegians could fight against the Germans was by having nothing to do with them. In the summer of 1944, Ludwig Messner, thank you author for shortening his name, was sent back to Germany to defend the Third Reich in the Eastern Front. He wasn't even able to say a proper goodbye to Grandma. The moment he stepped onto the train at Arundel, he disappeared from Grandma's life. She never heard another word from him, even though for many years after the war she tried to track him down. After a while, she felt pretty sure he'd been killed in the fighting against the Russians. Both the bike ride to Froland and everything that followed would probably have been forgotten if Grandma hadn't got pregnant. It happened just before Grandpa left for the Eastern Front, but she didn't know it until many weeks after he'd gone. Dad refers to what happened next as human devilry, and at this point he usually lights another cigarette. Dad was born just after Liberation Day in May 1945, which is the 80-year anniversary coming up this May 2025. Just a little. As soon as the Germans surrendered, Grandma was taken prisoner by the Norwegians, who hated all Norwegian girls who had been with German soldiers. Unfortunately, there were more than a few of these girls, but it was worse for those who'd had a child with a German. The truth was that Grandma had been with Grandpa because she loved him, and not because she was a Nazi. Actually, Grandpa wasn't a Nazi either. Before he'd been grabbed by the collar and sent back to Germany, he and Grandma had been making plans to escape to Sweden together. The only thing that stopped them was a rumour of Swedish border guards shooting German deserters who tried to cross the border. This isn't going to be like Hunger Games. This is going to But like all books, you've got the The people of Arundel attacked Grandma and shaved her head. They also beat and kicked her, even though she was the mother of a newborn baby. One can honestly say that Ludwig Messner had behaved better. With not so much as a hair on her head, Grandma had to travel to Oslo to stay with Uncle Trivk and Aunt Ingrid. It was no longer safe for her in Arundel. Although it was spring and the weather was warm, she had to wear a woolen hat because she was as bald as an old man. Her mother continued to live in Arundel, but Grandma didn't return until 5 years after the war, with Dad, her baby, in tow. Neither Grandma nor Dad seek to excuse what happened at Froland. The only thing you might question is the punishment. For example, how many generations should be punished for one offence? Naturally, Grandma must take her part of the blame for getting pregnant, and that is something she'll never deny. I think it's more difficult to accept that people believed it was right to punish the child too. I thought a great deal about this. Dad came into the world because of a fall of man. But can't everyone trace their roots back to Adam and Eve? I know the comparison stumbles a little. One case revolved around apples and the other one around cowberries. But the inner tube, which brought Grandma and Grandpa together, does look a little like the snake that tempted Adam and Eve. Anyway, all mothers know you can't go around your whole life blaming yourself for a child that is already born. Moreover, you can't blame the child. I also believe that the illegitimate child of a German soldier is entitled to be happy in life. Dad and I have disagreed slightly on this particular point. Ooh, I hope we get to before the 30 minutes. We've got a page and a half to go. Dad grew up not only as an illegitimate child, but also as an illegitimate child of the enemy. Although the adults in Arundel stopped beating the collaborators, the children continued to persecute the unfortunate innocents. Children are very clever at learning devilry from adults. This meant that Dad had a tough childhood. By the time he was 17 years old, he couldn't take it anymore. Although he loved Arundel like everyone else, he was forced to start a life at sea. He returned to Arundel 7 years later, having already met Mama in Kristiansand. They moved into an old house on Hisøy Island, and that is where I was born, on February the 29th, 1972. Of course, in some way, I have to bear my part of the blame for what happened up at Froland as well. This is what is known as original sin. Having experienced a childhood as the illegitimate child of a German soldier and then spent many years at sea, Dad had always enjoyed a strong drink or two. In my opinion, he enjoyed that a little bit too much. He claimed that he drank to forget, but here he was mistaken, for when Dad drank, he always started talking about Grandma and Grandpa and his life as the illegitimate child of a German soldier. Sometimes he would start to cry as well. I think the alcohol just made him remember all the better. After Dad had told me his life story again on the highway outside Hamburg, he said, "And then Mama disappeared. When you started nursery school, she got her first job as a dance teacher. Then she started modelling. There was quite a lot of travelling to Oslo and a couple of times to Stockholm as well. And then one day, she just didn't come home. The only message we got from her was a letter saying she'd found a job abroad and didn't know when she'd be back. People say this sort of thing when they're away a week or two, but Mama's been gone for more than 8 years." I've just worked out, so that means that Hans Thomas, who was talking, is 12 years old. I've heard this many times before as well, but then Dad added, "There's always been somebody missing in my family, Hans Thomas. Someone has always got lost. I think it's a family curse." When he mentioned the curse, I was a little scared. But then I thought about it in the car and realised he was right. Between us, Dad and I were missing a father and a grandfather, a wife and a mother. And there was even more which Dad most definitely had in mind. When Grandma was a little girl, her father had been killed by a falling tree. So she had almost grown up without a proper father. Maybe that's why she ended up having a child by a German soldier who would go to war and die. And maybe that's why this child married a woman who went to Athens to find herself. That is the end of the story. Right. I hope you enjoyed that. I think the language is a bit better than Hunger Games. And I just know the book gets you thinking about things, even long after you finish reading the book. So we'll persevere. Be honest about whether you're enjoying it or not. I think probably I know, because it's how I feel when I'm reading it as well, or whether you seem to enjoy it. So, next chapter, so that was the Ace of Spades. The next chapter, that's spades, is the Two of Spades. Okay, so I think we need to get to the sticky bun story, because that's when it talks about. Love you loads. See you soon. Mwah.